Okay, now I can, I'm going to be taking this meeting in my car.
Oh, well, I hope you're not watching any kind of a screen.
No. I'm just going to listen in. I'm going to try to drive through the traffic as I'm at the office right now, but I'm just starting to shut down. Anyway, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm about Delphi'd to death, but it's frustrating because
actually. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just said I've never actually led a Delphi study. I've known of it and read about it, but never actually led one.
Well, they're very popular in healthcare, and that's actually where my point of origin is. I evolved out of healthcare, healthcare information systems, and so I was introduced to a Delphi study actually probably 30 years ago when I was only about 7 by a researcher at Kaiser Permanente where I was working. And I was really intrigued, and we can talk about that sometime, but it's, oh, what is that? Got a pretty picture of something.
All right. Sounds like other people are coming in.
Well, drive carefully.
Yep, I'm actually going to mute out here so people don't hear me walking through the hallways here on the way to the car. So good to talk to you, Phil.
Okay, Mark. Take care.
Are we going to get a copy of the deck after the meeting?
Yeah, I believe that's my intention is to make this PowerPoint presentation available to all the people who are present. There's a lot of speakers notes with the slides, obviously. So yeah, I definitely plan on making that happen.
A lot of us
that would
dialed
be
in
awesome.
at 4 o'clock Mountain Time when we were here an hour. I've been here an hour. Was there a mix-up with the time?
Well, it's 4 o'clock Phoenix time. Phoenix time is not necessarily Mountain time. With the Phoenix goes to the same as Pacific Daylight Time.
Right. The meeting invite said Mountain Time that I received. That's why I dialed in.
Yeah, the confusion around that is, and we've just got to get dialed in on that. It is Mountain Standard Time, but we're actually on Pacific Daylight Time, which is the same. So that's where the confusion comes in.
Right. Well, I'm in Georgia, which is Eastern Daylight Time, and my clock says it's 7 o'clock.
You do me a favor, Phil. You start recording the meeting because I have to get out. I don't verify that it's being recorded, please.
How do I do that?
At the bottom right hand side, you will see like a red button. You have to push it.
I see something showing recording. I see recording status at the bottom left of my.
Oh, it's recording. It is recording. I'm sorry. Oh. It is recording already. Sorry. Go ahead. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, Dr. Davidson, this is David, but the session is recording, so you're all set to start. Everything looks good.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that.
Sure. Thanks, Armando.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Well, I guess we'll get started then. So our goal here is to talk about the Delphi technique, and my name is Dr. Phil Davidson, and I'm a member of the Research Methodology Special Interest Group. And I am hearing a lot of background noise, so I would ask that people put their speakers on mute. Yeah. So in this presentation, we have about an hour to discuss the Delphi technique, and that's going to be a challenge because there's so much material and there's so much information. But I want to cover some of the basic characteristics that define the Delphi technique. I want to talk a little bit about the origins of Delphi, which I find fascinating, but not necessarily everybody does. And I would talk a little bit about the theoretical framework, which is always a little bit of a challenge for students. I want to spend most of my time talking about how the methodology works, and then talk about some of the obstacles that students and faculty face in trying to implement the Delphi process. I'm going to provide you with some examples that I really have been taken by for English, examples that I thought are really great, and then we'll talk a little bit about different kinds of Delphis, and we'll also we'll end with a question and answer. Now, I don't mind if you have a question you want to ask while we're doing this. I would assume that you ask questions if something's really important to you. If it's something that can wait to the end, that works as well. Okay? So let's charge on ahead here. So the characteristics of the Delphi.
Dr. Davison, this is David Proudfoot once again. I just wanted to provide some technical assistance for those callers who may not know how to mute their lines. If you're calling in from a landline or some sort of phone, *6 will mute your line. If you're calling in from like an application from an iPad or smartphone, you should see the mute button there that you can press. But that will eliminate any background noise. Dr. Davison, there is a feature where you can mute everybody on your end as the administrator, but as people enter the meeting, maybe they come in late, you're going to have to mute them as well because they come in unmuted. So that's just some tips for all of us to kind of reduce the background noise and the disruptions.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Dr. Davidson, this is Mansura. We can hear you, but yeah, you may want to go ahead and continue.
Yeah, maybe it's better to mute everybody so we can continue with the discussion.
Are you okay, Phil?
Dr. Davidson, can you hear? Can you hear us?
Phil?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on with the sound here. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and hope that the sound gets better. Turoff and Lindstrom are two of the leading experts and employees of the. I'm going to try changing a headset here in case that this noise is coming from me. So if you bear with me just one more second.
It was better. Before it was better, Dr. Davidson. You may want to switch back to the setting that you had before this.
What setting, Dr. Gabuche?
So like when he says he would use different headsets, like after that it's harder to hear him. Before that it was better.
I see.
How's this sound? Okay, can you hear me?
No, now it's very weak. Maybe you want to talk louder.
That better?
Little bit better, but yeah, try to talk a little bit louder.
Okay, I'm still getting this.
Yeah, the sound is very low.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the characteristics of the Delphi. One of the things I want to point out here was the people's names that I'm mentioning here. Norman Dalkey and Turoff and Lindstrom. One of the things that I find interesting is that when students are doing in Delphi, they don't go back into the history of it. So in talking about the characteristics of Delphi, there are a group of characteristics. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I apologize for those problems. Delphi is one of two primary consensus-focused research designs. The other one is called the nominal group technique, which is similar to the Delphi, except that, and both of them are consensus-focused, and both of them use experts, but the emphasis on expertise is not as strong with a nominal group technique because you can use people who just have experience. One primary difference is that Delphi is future-focused. It's a forecasting tool, whereas nominal group technique is not. The nominal group technique, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is a research tool for consensus. It uses the same set of rounds, iterations as Delphi. But the goal here is to find consensus. And the word consensus, people really get focused on what that means, and students especially get really focused on consensus. But we're not really trying to come up with just one best answer. In fact, I've never done a Delphi study where we came up with just one answer. We are trying to get closer to solutions to future problems. For instance, one of the studies that I enjoyed doing was trying to define how we could deal with cybersecurity issues for online education in the future. But it's not just getting antiviral software, or it's not just getting encrypted software. There are a lot of issues with online education, political, financial. So getting a group of experts from all these different fields was really important. And so we aren't trying to come up with one answer, because there can't be just one answer. And that's and if you read the more current Delphi research studies, there's less emphasis on consensus. But what you'll see sometimes is that in the last portion, in the last round of the Delphi study, we tend to come up with themes, as we would in other qualitative studies, and the themes themselves may have an overarching consensus. One of the aspects that I'll talk about in just a little bit with methodology is that Delphi uses a set of rounds. The idea is that the first round, we're dealing with problems that are messy. We're dealing with complicated problems, and the problems we have are problems that don't have good data, or data is missing. So the first part of the Delphi study usually is to help define what the problem is. And then we go through a series of rounds to come up with the best answers. One characteristic of the Delphi is the role of the researcher. And this is where we lose a lot of students, because the student researcher needs to be actively involved with the participants. And that doesn't mean just sending out emails and getting emails back and sending emails. But in the original Delphi studies, if you read the early work, what you will see is that after the first round, the researcher will provide new information. We do literature research, we do studies, there's new information that will be helpful to the participants. So being actively involved is really important. Another issue with Delphi is that the participants are anonymous to one another. The anonymity is really important. This has been true from the very beginning. We're trying to avoid people with really strong reputations overpowering other people who may, out of respect, decide that, well, I would go with this person because he or she knows more than I do. Or sometimes people are just simply more assertive or louder, and so they tend to shut down, or people who are shy have a hard time participating. So in a situation where we have anonymity, people don't feel that kind of pressure. They don't know who else is going to participate, and so they tend to be more honest, we hope. That's the next thing. There are arguments about that. And there are a few cases where anonymity is not part of the Delphi, at least in part of it. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Probably, I think, one of the most important aspects, all of these aspects are characteristics important, but I want to emphasize that Delphi is future focused. We're not talking about trying to find best methods. And this is what I see a lot with students, is that they have a problem that's clearly defined, and they want to get a group of their friends together and come up with the best ways to deal with the problem that they already know about. And that's not a Delphi study. As I said, Delphi works with problems that are poorly understood or missing data, and that's kind of a problem because the university wants students to have a very clear-cut problem statement. But in a Delphi study, the general problem may be more clear, but the specific problem is going to have a lot of gaps in it, and that's one of the reasons we do a Delphi study. So the student's going to need to understand that, and is going to need to be able to explain that. And the last part, which I want to spend more time on, is about the expertise of the participants, and I will spend more time on that in just a second here. So, all right, okay. So I want to just talk a little bit about the beginning part of when the original project of the Delphi study was a a project that was started by the U.S. Air Force and they hired or contracted with the RAND Corporation. And it was the Air Force who suggested the idea of calling it the Delphi, say after the Oracle in ancient Greece. But the researchers, when you read some of they weren't really crazy about that idea. But I think the analogy is really is more important than just a flippant piece of historical data. Back in like 300, 400 BC, when the Delphic Oracle was at its height, people came from all over the known world, all over the Mediterranean world, to come and ask about a prediction of the future. And they'd be kings and royalty. They come and stand in line for sometimes for weeks for a chance, because the Oracle, I understand that the Oracle was the voice of Apollo. The speaker was called the Pythia. She was a priestess who was supposedly in tune with Apollo. They would ask questions. She would check in with Apollo, and he would give her the answers. And then they had a group of priests that would take what the Pythia had told them, and they would interpret the answers to the supplicant, whoever was asking a question. And that's what's really important. I don't think probably there are many people online that are really into the history of this, but I was reading in the works of Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish scholar who lived in Rome and wrote about Greece, a very interesting combination. And he was actually one of the priests of Delphi around 180. And he made comments that what the priests did is because Delphi was really in the center of activity of the Mediterranean world at that time, with all the people coming and going to talk with to ask their questions of the oracle. And so the priests were very much the knowledge experts of what was really going on. So the Pythia, when she gave her pronouncements from Apollo, they would shape what she was telling them. Sometimes what she was saying was just nonsense, but they would shape the responses to the supplicants to fit the situation. So we're a little bit of that feel of, we have experts here. In this case, our experts are not priests, and we're not talking to God, although since most of this research is done in medicine, some of the physicians might think otherwise. But the reality is that the background I thought was interesting, but the work of the Air Force started back in the 1950s, and the Air Force went to RAND and said, we want to know how many bombs Russia would have to drop on the United States to permanently destabilize the U.S. infrastructure. Now, the important part of that question is, all they want to know is the number. And it sounds like, it's a fuzzy answer, because it depends on the size, it depends on where the bombs hit. And so RAND Corporation involved several different expert groups. They had people involved with Russian psychology. They had people involved with atomic fusion, other engineers. So they had multiple groups of experts trying to forecast this answer. So again, the key purpose here is to try to come up with a collection of informed judgment issues that are largely unexplored and they're difficult to define. They're very context and expertise specific, and they're always future oriented, and that's really important. So one of the things that's a little bit hard to understand is that if you read some of the original work, the very first work that Bernice Brown and Omar Helmer, some of the original, very first researchers ran that published, all this work was classified into the 1960s. And when they published their studies, what they were doing is they were asking questions like, what's the area in square miles of Los Angeles County, or what's the surface of the moon in thousands of square miles? Now, these are kinds of questions that nobody has at their fingertips, and part of what they're trying to study is the effect of consensus. In other words, if I ask a group of people how big is Los Angeles in square miles, and I take all their answers and I give it back to them, and then in the second round I says, well, okay, this is what everybody said. Now look at your answer and rethink your answer, and is your answer high or low, and how do you feel you fit in here? So through a series of iterations, they move closer and closer to the answer. So what they're really studying wasn't so much the content, but they were just studying the process. Okay. So let's go to the theoretical framework here. The theoretical framework is there are several kinds of theoretical frameworks. The ones that I typically use here are dealing with prediction theory. One of the most fascinating papers in this area is written by Kaplan, Skogstad, and Gersig, and they're dealing with prediction theory and the accuracy of prediction, and how do you validate prediction. What are the different variables, including the background of the speaker, of the participants? What are their biases? What are their preferences? So prediction theory is the model that we're typically using here. An argument from a premise to a conclusion is an inference, and those that are expressed in the future tense are classified as predictions. So that's the frame. That's the statement that was made by McGregor. Excuse me. Okay. All right. I want to talk about the methodology here. Now, this is a simplistic picture, but I like it because it's understandable. But if you look at the facilitator, the researcher is going to ask the participants a question or a set of questions. We talk about a questionnaire. If you read the Delphi information, you will see that they always talk about the researchers giving questionnaire. And the word questionnaire here is kind of a generic term. Let me, as an example, when I was doing my cybersecurity for online education, I asked the participants, what are 3 issues that need to be addressed in the future to maintain security of online educational learning management systems? So what I'm asking them, I ask each one of them to give me 3 answers. And when they did that, what I would do, I'd say, okay, give me 3 answers. And so if I have 20 people on my panel of experts, they give me back their answers, and I have 60 answers, and I look for those that are similar or the same, and I put them together. And that's how I deal with my first round, is essentially I'm data gathering. But at the same time, I look at what they've given me. I do a literature search and see if there's anything else that supports or argues against their point. And so at the end of my first round, I have the data. I have the data sorted by what are the most common answers to the least common answers. And what I'll do then is I begin the second round is I will give these answers back to the experts. Of course, there's, again, anonymity is really important. So I'm not telling anybody who said what, nor am I giving them any indication of the dominance of one answer over another. I usually give them the answers back in an alphabetical order, so I don't give them any indication of which percentage of the answers. But I may not give them all the answers. It depends on how many participants I have. Because in the second round, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to prioritize their responses. So in this way, we're starting to move towards consensus by establishing priorities. At the same time, I'm asking them to reconsider their first answers. And this is really important. So they prioritize this, but I'm also asking them to give me feedback as to why they're answering, how they're answering. So there is some qualitative aspect here in this second round. And so they prioritize those and they send those back to me with their explanations. Then again, I take and I aggregate the data, and I take their content, their questions or responses to the questions. And then in the last round, what I do is this part is there's more variability here, but what I typically do, depending on how many people are involved, is I will take like the top 3 solutions that the experts have come up with, and then I will ask them, and we will drill down, and I will ask them to explain in detail how we're going to fix this or how we're going to implement these solutions in the future. And this is the area that is going to be the largest amount of text. And so I may go through another round to ask them to expand even further on what they've said. And we can get a fair amount of things here. So when I'm doing the analysis, and again, the first round, my analysis is going to be, it's mostly descriptive statistics. I'm looking at the number of, it's not descriptive, it's central mean kind of stuff, just averages. So I'm looking to see what were the most common answers, and I'm looking at their explanations. And on the second round, I'm looking at some of the content. But the third round, I'm actually doing contextual analysis, and I use a tool called QDA Miner, which is certainly can use something like in vivo. Any of the software textual analysis tools would work, because what I'm going to do with that third round is I'm going to be looking for, I'm going to be going through the normal process of looking for categories and subcategories and then establishing themes with the process. Okay. So what are some of the obstacles? The first one mentioned, when I say this future focus, the students will hear this and they say, well, okay, so we have a problem, but a solution would be in the future, right? Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying here. What we're talking about is, and I'll give you some examples that I think are really superior. The future focus is like, I want to know, one of the Delphi studies I did was asking students what they thought teachers should be doing like 20 years from now. It was kind of a weird study. It was interesting to hear what they thought. That, what were the kinds of things they expected from faculty 20 years from now in an online environment. Not surprisingly, their expectations were the same thing they expect right now, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is that Delphi is definitely focused on the future. It is not something that for doing best methods. If a student has a problem and he wants to get a group of people together to find out best methods, then he or she should look at the nominal group technique. And I'm more than happy to supply information on that tool as well. One of the biggest challenges is finding experts. And I have to tell you a story here briefly. I have a student who's doing a Delphi technique. He's gone through QRM. He's got IRB approval. And I kept asking him, so who are your experts going to be? Because what he's doing is a very technical study. And he says, well, it's not a problem. I got the names of these groups, these organizations. I'm going to talk to these 4 companies. Well, the reality is that once he got IRB approval, he could not find anybody to talk to him, because the field is so technical and because there's so much competition, nobody wanted to talk. Even though he assured them this is going to be anonymous, they didn't know him. And it's been over a year. It's been like a year and 3 months, and he still has no participants. I've gone out and tried to show him how to find those experts. And this is really a problem, because students will go too far too quickly without thinking about who the experts are going to be. Who are their panels going to be? What I do is I look, there are 3 things that I use to define what our experts are. An expert is somebody who has an educational background. An expert is somebody who has the practical work experience in this field. And an expert is somebody who others in the field look up to as an expert. And so the way I go about it is I look for shows. I look for meetings where papers are presented and find out who's presenting on these topics. And then I use LinkedIn and Facebook and any other social media I can to learn as much as I can about these experts and about their background. And then I will send them letters to inquire more. But I spend more time vetting my expert panel than I do in the research. On the cybersecurity paper, it took me like 4 months to find enough people to do a panel, and it was not a very big panel. So students need to understand that. This is not just, I had one student who decided that she was going to just ask her coworkers to be the experts. And I explained she
Hello, Phil?
I think we lost him.
It looks like. Let me call him quickly.
No, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I must have stepped on the mouse here. Okay, sorry. So the third thing here about the student, the students need to not be passive participants. It's really weird when I teach the third-year residency when we're talking about different research methods, and sometimes I will talk about it at Delphi, and you will see students light up thinking, this is my answer, this is what I need to do, because I don't really have to do anything. All I have to do is send out a survey or questions or whatever and collect the answers, and voila, I'm done with my study. And that's not the question. That's not the, but I hate it when they look at me and then their eyes light up saying, there's no, wait, there's more to it than that. The last thing is that because we do use questionnaires, the students are going to have to be familiar with what are the ways you validate those questionnaires. I want to mention sample size real quickly. How many people do you need to have in a Delphi panel of experts? And there isn't a good answer for that, unfortunately. People are all over the place. Delbeck, which I cite in this paper, he made a statement which I think was very funny. He says that with a homogeneous group of people, 10 or 15 participants might be enough. And that would be true, except usually with the kinds of studies we're doing, our experts are not homogeneous. In my study on like the cybersecurity, I might have somebody who's an expert on security. I might have somebody who's an expert on learning management systems, and somebody who's an expert on just online education. So, and honestly, I try to do 20 people. You certainly can do more. I've seen Delphi studies that do a lot more, but a lot of it depends on the kind of study you're going to do, which we'll talk about real soon here. But there are practical limits to how much time. If you have 20 experts, and if it took me 4 months to try and vet, my panel, do students have that much time? Do they have that much patience to do that? They need to think about these things early on, not after IRB. Okay. I want to mention these 3 studies because I think they are terrific. The study by Rossman and others deals with big data. Now, I'm a big fan of big data. I do big data studies. I have oversight of our DMIST program, and information systems is a big thing. So this study, which just came out not very long ago, talks what they're doing is they're trying to study what the impact of big data will be on supply chain management in 2035. So they're looking out, figuring that, so it's posted in 17, so they probably did this in 2015, so they're looking at maybe 20 years. Now, supply chain management is incredibly important for most organizations of any size. And big data, of course, is becoming critical as far as being able to be agile and I'm not sure why that said that, but okay. So, can you all still hear me? Are
yes.
we still okay, thank you. So this was, I thought, was incredibly insightful. It was a very well-run Delphi study. The one thing that if a student reads this that might throw them is they use fuzzy logic in doing the analysis. So the analysis might be, you don't have to do it that way, but I really like the way they ran their study. The research project by Gordon and Peace, I include that here because they did what was called a real-time Delphi. I'm fascinated with it. I've never tried to do a real-time Delphi, but the idea is that you get everybody together at the same time. Now, this is really a big issue. The timing on a Delphi study is really critical, and students need to, I mean, any student who's tried to do oral defense, and in oral defense, you only have to get 3 people together, and it sometimes takes a couple of weeks to try and find one time when they can all be together. So if you have 20 people, imagine how hard it can be to try and find a time when they can all be working together. And in a real-time Delphi, a lot of times what they will do is they will simply be physically in the same building, although because of the anonymity, they might all be in different rooms. But you can also do real time if everybody's on a computer remotely, but at the same time. And that was essentially, I think, what Gordon and Peace did, is that they were using a study where not everybody was physically in the same building, but they were all online at the same time. And they did all 3 rounds within the same day. So timing-wise, that's great, but the logistics and managing logistics is a real challenge. And then the last one, this study by Keller and Venderek. I like this one because it's classical Delphi, classical series of rounds, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to look into the future to see how information communication technology, ICT, how this will affect us in 2020. So figure this, they're reaching out probably 5 years into the future. It's fun to read these studies because sometimes they will vary a little bit, but basically the process is the same that I've related to you. Excuse me here. All right, here we go. So, not surprisingly, there are lots of different kinds of Delphi studies. The classical one I've described to you, and that's the one I've focused on most of the time here, is one where you give a group of experts a questionnaire. The original classical Delphi used mail, but that's not surprising considering it was originally done in the 1950s. Didn't have internet yet. So the classical Delphi, now the RAND Corporation study was actually done at RAND in Santa Monica. But that, or they did a lot of studies over at UCLA, but those were kind of exceptions. But a classical Delphi, could certainly be done by mail. The eDelphi which is what I typically do, is I work with my experts to set up a series of rounds, and we do it by email. But you can also do it you could use SurveyMonkey or some other tool like that. What I do is I work with my expert panel, and I get them to agree on a specific time, and I don't dawdle. When they send me stuff back, I work and I get it back to them right away, and I can typically get a Delphi study done in 2 weeks. I get all the answers back. I can't get it all resolved, but I can't get it all written up, but I get my raw data in 2 weeks. A modified Delphi is you will hear about people who use focus groups, and that typically when we talk about a modified Delphi, they do the first round as a focus group. I've never tried this one because when I first started working as a consultant back in 1999, wow, okay, so like almost 20 years ago, that's all I did was focus groups. And I don't like focus groups, but the contract was to do that. It's really hard to be unbiased. It's hard to keep people from doing the things that we don't want them to do in a Delphi study, where they badger each other or they talk over other people. So it's hard for But in a modified Delphi, the idea is to get as many ideas out on the table. That's a brainstorming session usually. And I can see how that might be effective. You might, by hearing each other talk, you might be able to get more ideas out on the table. Then the rest of the study is done anonymously. People retire and go someplace else, or you do it all online afterwards. Real-time Delphi, I just mentioned earlier, the idea being that everybody is either online at the same time or physically in the same building. Now, Policy Delphi is interesting, and I actually have 2 students doing Policy Delphis right now, and I didn't even push them into this. But Policy Delphi is it's the one Delphi where we really aren't that focused on experts, but we are focused on people who are experienced in politics. And they don't even really have to work that hard on coming to any kind of consensus. But the idea of a Policy Delphi is to come up with as many different possible solutions politically to a particular problem. If anybody's interested in the Policy Delphi, Lindstone and Turoff wrote, I think it was, I have a citation, a reference in the talking extensively about Policy Delphi. I've not done one. I try to do everything I can to avoid anything political, but anyhow, it is interesting. And my 2 students are doing, I think, some really interesting studies, and I'm really anxious to see how their Policy Delphis come out. The last one I put in, the disaggregative Delphi, I find interesting because it breaks down what the participants, the input for the participants, they're breaking it down into clusters. And it uses a systematic tool for grouping core qualitative variables together. Again, I can't cover that in detail here because we're almost out of time already anyhow. But disaggregative Delphi, I have not seen one as a dissertation, but it's really interesting in how it takes the data and parses it out. So that's really pretty much all I can say about that. Here's a group of references. I have almost 200 articles and books on this topic. I'm more than happy to provide any kind of whatever I can offer to anybody who has questions about it. I've studied it for a long time. I don't bill myself as an expert in Delphi because every day I research this. I'm writing a group of articles. I talked to a publisher who wants me to write a book on Delphi, but we decided that what we would do is we would write a group of several articles first and then take that and make that into a book. And the first one is just trying to deal with the subject of who is an expert and who's not an expert. And it is not easy. It's really complicated. Are there any questions, or has everybody left because of the noise?
No.
It's really gotten quiet. I appreciate that. It was really terrible at the beginning.
Hey, Phil, this is Nancy Boston. Can you hear me?
I certainly can, Nancy. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Hey, so I've had some students in the past who have done a modified Delphi, and the modification was based on the research literature on their subject.
Okay.
So they presented information from the research literature about their question, and then asked if they thought if that was what they, then they asked their panel if they agreed with or saw that as, is there anything that they would delete, or is there anything that they would add, or that sort of thing. That was the first round, and that was considered the modification.
Yeah. Well,
have you heard of that?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah,
right.
that makes a lot of sense actually, because I would do it probably the other way around, but no, I would ask the questions and then give them that literature at the beginning of the second round. But no, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good way to get it started.
And that was instead of focus groups where they end up fighting.
I really don't like to do focus groups, but I know people do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Phil, Armando, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
My question goes along the curriculum and all the changes that have been happening at Phoenix oriented to get a more robust and rigorous dissertation group. And for example, I am working on the quantitative side with the designers going back to the 709, 710, and 720. And one of the things we are doing, or at least I try to do, is elevate the knowledge and expertise of the students so they can get away from the just my story is a correlation, blah, blah, blah. And if you go back to the qualitative side of the coin, I bet you that, although it's not my expertise, but you see this repeated, and the same methodologies all over. So I think, are we doing something about on the qualitative side, although Delphi can become quantitative as well, so we can present a more robust and rigorous methodologies to students so they can adventure to go beyond the regular thing that they do on a daily basis?
Well, Armando, I think that's a great question. I don't think it's being done right now. And the thing is that I try to encourage students to do more robust studies and I can offer opinions, but I don't want to do that about why they don't. But I will come in to their residency and they will say they want to do a Delphi. I say, well, what research have they done? They say, well, I read this article. And they never talk about the RAND studies. They don't even know what that is. And then when I finally point them at the RAND website, and the RAND website has all of their research from the very beginning up until right now. They still are doing Delphi research. But I think that they're tired. They don't have the drive. And so, and from our standpoint, I think we as faculty are still trying to work out the process about how we do that. We are not in agreement with each other, and so I think what you're saying, Armando, is really important. I just don't know how we're going to get there. I was a student for the University of Phoenix in the IO Psych program, and I know how tired you can get and how beat up you can be as a student. And so, we want them to be rigorous researchers. We want to them, but if I showed them my list of references for Delphi, their eyes would roll up and they'd probably fall over dead because they're not going to do that kind of research. But admittedly, I've been doing this for years. But every time I find one article, it leads me down the road to others. But to try and shape a study, having read just one article from one person, is, I don't know. So that's the best answer I can give you. We're not doing it yet. What I'm seeing is more and more people are just going to just case studies, and they say if I can do a case study, then that's all I have to do and get out of here.
So this is Julia Quinn, and I'm going to agree with you. I had a student lose an entire course due to the faculty declining that Delphi was a viable technique. Oh. And I'm concerned that when the paper finally gets to QRM, that the reviewer won't have the same level of expertise that you're suggesting that we have. I've done several Delphi studies, and I'm concerned that I'm going to get a roadblock for this student again. So I think it's an important dialogue to have.
Yeah, I can't believe somebody would say it was not a viable technique. It's the thousands, literally thousands of dissertations written on Delphi. I can give them numbers. I've got it all charted out.
Oh, I'm sure. And I offered the person several references to help them to reconsider their position. But an entire 8-week course was spent having that dialogue back and forth instead of advancing the student. And it was unfortunate. Again, though, I'm worried about QRM because I'm not sure of the expertise of that team sometimes when there's something that veers from narrative case study.
Well, QRM now is just URM and yourself if you're the chair. Just the two of you are the ones who review.
And just to let you know, I've had several students at University of Phoenix, this is Nancy Bostain again, do Delphi studies, and they went through the entire process, and they're done. They're doctors now.
Yep, good point.
So it doesn't, you know, as long as they do the footwork and do what Phil's talking about, it can be done.
Yep, that's right, Nancy. There are a lot of dissertations, well, a lot, and there's, you know, over a dozen Delphi studies have been done recently. And I have questions probably every week. No, not probably. I definitely have questions every week and sometimes every day from students and faculty about doing Delphi studies. So I'm just floored that somebody would say it's not a viable technique. I would like to really talk to that person out back behind the barn. Okay, how are we doing? We got a few more minutes. Any other questions?
Phil, this is Rosanna Topchan. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine, Rosanna. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm
so
well.
I did have one student who, in the very beginning, she just mentioned that she's doing a Delphi study. I said, this is not going to work. You have to go and read about it and come and explain it so in such detail so that everybody understands what it is. And her dissertation was pretty well written and detailed with all the rounds described in every chapter, etc. Then there was another person who came and said, and I'm using a Delphi style, whatever, technology, technique. So, but then the other thing was very interesting because one of the students came in with quantitative Delphi. Now there are certain designs which are the borderline, and I'm assuming Delphi is one of them because it uses descriptive statistics plus something else, right?
Right.
So, from your perspective, would you use the approach at all? I mean, do we need to use? I mean, for instance, when I was writing my dissertation, which was quantitative, and I was using structural equation modeling, I didn't go down into saying quantitative, qualitative, whatever. It was just a technique. Now we try to make students try to come up with labels which sometimes are very, I mean, unrealistic, and they sound funny too. So how would you just go with Delphi technique, or would you, because I don't know, like quantitative portion is also coming into that.
Well, there are Delphi studies that really use statistical data, and they really are quantitative. But in the way I do it, where I'm just collecting some averages, I don't consider that statistical or quantitative, not really. So most of the time, my Delphi studies are qualitative because that's really what I'm looking for, those themes at the end of the process. So, but I agree with you that to put a tag on it, it really is kind of on the edge. But I typically describe it as well, I typically don't even say qualitative, although in the details I will explain that, if like in chapter 2 and chapter 3, I would have the student explain the qualitative or quantitative nature of what it is they're doing.
Right.
But one other thing too, though, Oksana, you mentioned about a student coming and said that she was going to do a Delphi study. I had a student at a residency not long ago who came in and said she was going to do grounded theory. I said, oh, really? And says, so you've read Glazer's work, and she hadn't read any of the work. But her URM told her that she should do grounded theory, and that if she did grounded theory, that she would be on her committee. Then I explained to her what grounded theory was, and her eyes got very big, and she wound up doing a case study.
Right. Very interesting.
I think students, this is a problem, is that they grab onto one piece of information that they've heard from somebody about this kind of study, and they say, well, that sounds really good. And then they say, and then they commit in the proposal, but they haven't done the research yet.
Right.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe we push them that way. I don't know. But, yeah, we got to stop doing that part.
Well, I mean, what I felt is that students have different future plans, And some students really are interested in research, and they see life after dissertation also being related to research. For some others, it's just get my degree and get out, not even publish something or, not even think about research after they are done. So I'm not sure how much we can do in that case, but those who are really committed and then they want to do something beyond the defense, we can definitely probably work with them.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
So this is Karen. Can you take one more question?
Absolutely.
When you have students who are doing Delphi studies for their dissertation, how do you have them talk about the typical categories of population and sampling? Do you deal with that, or you just talk about vetting the expert?
The population as far as the participants, Karen?
Yes.
Well,
population. You know how most of our URMs and other reviewers are expecting a section on population and a section on sampling in Chapter 3 of the proposal. That doesn't seem to me to really fit clearly in the Delphi technique. So,
well, the thing is, I did get your email just before the, but I think that's a really important part here, because the population are your experts, and you have to. One of the original researchers on the Delphi really criticized. He really said some really bad things in a book called The Delphi Critique. But the bottom line. And it was, who was the author? Oh, Harold Sackman. And the biggest problem was that the Delphi technique, there isn't a good definition of what an expert is. And so the short answer here is that the students have to define who their experts are. They have to justify who they are. They have to examine the population of potential experts in their field or multiple fields. And we don't do that. My students have to do that, because I won't let them go past that point, because that's probably the single most important thing in getting set up for doing the studies. They have to examine the field of the population of their experts and how they're going to deal with that. How many? There may be only 4 experts in the entire world that are appropriate, and then that question is: are you even supposed to be doing this kind of study if you only have 4 possible people? Does that help at all? Okay.
Dr. Davidson, this is Jasper Green. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, sir. I'm a first-year resident, and my problem is dealing with how the blockchain is actually going to be changing a lot of the way that we're doing business. And there's a lot more that I want to be talking about, but I'm probably going to send you an email so we can start a bigger dialogue with this. But I just wanted to make note that everyone that asked questions was very helpful, and I'm looking forward to doing a Delphi study on the blockchain and smart contracts.
Okay, Jasper, are you doing it in real estate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So I'm familiar with your study. Yeah, please stay in touch, because I think it's and I love talking about blockchain when a very hot topic. I can see that as a really interesting study. So yeah, stay in touch with me about that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, we're 1 minute past 8 o'clock. Is there anybody who needs to ask any more questions? Otherwise, we probably need to bring this thing to a close. All right. Well, I appreciate your all putting up with all the noise and So thank you for your time, and we'll send out a survey and ask for your input on that. And, thank you, folks.
Thanks, Phil. It was great.
All right. Thanks, then. Be well out back there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really worth the time.